My name is Robin Smith. I'm 27 years old, and for most of my life, I thought being dependable was the best thing a woman could offer. I paid my bills on time, kept a steady job in project coordination, never missed birthdays or anniversaries. I was the one people called when they needed a ride to the airport at 5 a.m. or someone to feed their cat while they went on vacation. Reliable, predictable, steady. For a long time, I thought Joseph appreciated that. We had been together almost 2 years, and from the outside, we probably looked solid. He was charismatic, the kind of man who could walk into a room and draw eyes without even trying. I was quieter, the one who liked to observe to smooth edges when conversations went rough. I believed we balanced each other. I gave more than I realized. When Joseph's hours were cut, I covered rent without complaint. When his car broke down, I picked him up for work every morning, even though it meant leaving my own job early. I learned to cook the meals he loved, listened to his endless venting about clients, even canceled a long-planned girls' trip because he didn't want to spend the weekend alone. Looking back now, the math is obvious. Love had become a ledger, and I was the only one adding to it. But at the time, I told myself this was what love meant, giving even when it was inconvenient, proving devotion in small sacrifices. Then there were the jokes, the ones that never landed. When we met his college buddies, he'd introduce me with a grin. "This is Robin, my safety net." They laughed. I laughed too, even though it lodged like a stone in my chest. Later, when I asked what he meant, he smirked. "You know, safe, dependable. You're the one a man can count on when the fun ones get boring." He brushed off my silence with a quick, "Don't be sensitive, babe." I wanted to believe actions mattered more than words. He came home to me every night. He said he loved me. That had to count for something. One night, as we sat on the couch watching Netflix, he dropped a sentence like it was nothing. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if I dated women who were a little more exciting." I paused the show. "What do you mean by exciting?" He shrugged, eyes on the screen. "You know, spontaneous. Women who don't just work, cook, and go to the gym. Women who live a little." The words stung, but I forced a laugh. "Well, someone has to make sure the bills get paid." He smirked without looking at me. "Exactly." That should have been the moment I realized where this was headed. Instead, I redoubled my efforts, thinking love was about proving myself. More surprises, more patience, more giving. Until the night of the party. It was one of Joseph's friends' birthdays, hosted at a downtown club. I hated crowded bars, the shouting, the overpriced drinks, the shallow small talk. But he wanted to go, so I ironed a dress shirt, fixed my hair, and went with him. The moment we walked in, he lit up like a star. He was in his element, throwing back shots, laughing too loud, hugging everyone as if he owned the room. I hung back, ordered drinks, smiled politely. That's when I saw her. Younger, maybe mid-20s, with long hair and a flirty laugh. Joseph zeroed in on her like a moth to flame. At first, I told myself he was just being friendly, but as the night stretched on, his friendly looked more like outright flirting. He leaned close when he spoke. She touched his arm, and he didn't move it away. At one point, he whispered something in her ear, and she giggled like it was the funniest thing in the world. Heat crawled up my neck, but I stayed quiet. I wasn't the jealous type. I believed trust meant giving space. Still watching my boyfriend entertain another woman while I stood in the shadows felt like a slap. When he finally wandered back to me, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, I asked lightly, "Having fun?" He grinned. "Yeah, she's hilarious. You should talk to her. You'd like her." I bit my tongue and said nothing, but the silence followed us into the car on the drive home. Joseph scrolled his phone, humming, acting like nothing was wrong. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Finally, I said, "Do you think it's okay to flirt with someone all night while your girlfriend is standing right there?" His head snapped up. "Flirt seriously. I was just talking." Talking doesn't usually involve touching someone's arm every 5 seconds. He rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic. It was innocent." It didn't look innocent. He sighed, the sound dripping with condescension. "Robin, you're reading too much into this. Not everything has to be a big deal." My jaw clenched. "I just don't like feeling invisible." And then, he smirked. That cruel, careless smirk. "Invisible. Please. You're fine. Look, you're the kind of woman men settle for when they've run out of options. You're dependable. You're safe, but you're not exciting. Women like her, they're exciting." The words punched the air out of me. "Settle for..." He shrugged, as if it was nothing. "I'm just being honest. Your wife material one day, sure, but I'm not ready to settle down. I don't want to waste my best years playing house with someone predictable." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke. But he didn't. He just scrolled on his phone like he'd explained something reasonable. 1,000 emotions surged through me: anger, humiliation, the urge to scream, to demand he take it back. But instead, something inside me went quiet. A switch flipped. "If that's how you see me," I said softly, eyes on the road, "then I won't waste your time." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you don't have to settle. Not with me." He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. I drove the rest of the way in silence, parked, and went straight to the couch with a blanket. He didn't follow. That was the night everything changed. The night I realized the man I'd given everything to saw me as nothing more than a placeholder until something better came along. And in that moment, I decided I would never play that role again. The morning after that party, sunlight streamed through the blinds like nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had shifted. Joseph padded into the kitchen wearing one of my old t-shirts, yawning phone already in his hand. He poured himself coffee, kissed the top of my head like the night before had never happened, and asked casually, "Want eggs?" I stared at him from the couch, my body aching from barely sleeping. The words from the car still echoed like a bruise that refused to fade, the kind of woman men settle for. "No thanks," I murmured. He shrugged, unfazed, and cracked eggs into a pan, whistling. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. As though tearing me down was just part of normal conversation. Something hardened in me right then. I realized I'd been living for scraps, waiting for him to wake up one day and recognize my worth. But he didn't care. He didn't see loyalty as strength. To him, it was boredom, predictability. So I made a decision. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't demand he change his mind. Instead, I started pulling back, quietly. At first, it was small things. I stopped cooking dinner after work. I'm not really hungry, I'd say, and let him fend for himself. I stopped texting him throughout the day, stopped asking how meetings went, or reminding him about deadlines. When he asked why I wasn't joining him for drinks with his friends, I smiled and said, "I'm tired tonight." Instead of staying up until midnight waiting for him to come home, I went to bed early. The distance grew invisible at first, but undeniable. I began collecting pieces of myself. A sweater here, a stack of books there moved quietly into boxes and then into the trunk of my car. I brought them over to my friend Maya's apartment, where she raised her brows but didn't ask questions. Just opened the door and let me place them in her spare room. "You sure about this?" she asked one evening, watching me unload another box. I nodded, my voice calm. I'm done trying to prove myself. Still, the ache didn't vanish overnight. In the evenings, when Joseph stayed out late, I'd sit on the couch, staring at the empty space beside me, remembering the girl who thought love meant sacrifice. I mourned her more than I mourned him. He didn't even notice the shift. Or maybe he noticed, but didn't care. He was too busy basking in the glow of attention from others. His phone buzzed constantly, names I didn't recognize lighting up the screen. When I asked who it was, he'd wave it off. Friends. You wouldn't know them. One night, he stumbled in after midnight, smelling of cologne that wasn't his. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. I had no energy left for confrontation. Silence was my rebellion. What he didn't know was that every act of indifference from me was deliberate. Every missing book, every cleared drawer, every skipped dinner was one more piece of myself I was reclaiming. I used to think walking away would require screaming tears, dramatic exits. But in reality, it was quieter, a slow unraveling. It was in the way I stopped answering his jokes with laughter, the way I stopped dressing up for his events, the way I let him drift further into his late nights without asking where he'd been. The truth was, I didn't need to expose him. He was exposing himself every day, and I was preparing for the moment I'd finally be gone. The night I finally left was quieter than I imagined freedom would sound. Joseph had gone out again. Some work happy hour that always seemed to turn into a half-forgotten bar crawl. I didn't ask where. I didn't ask when he'd be back. I already knew he wouldn't notice the difference. I stood in the apartment we had shared for nearly 2 years, looking around at the spaces where pieces of me used to live. The bookshelf I'd once filled was half empty now. The kitchen counter, once stacked with meal prep containers I made for us, was bare except for a few scattered takeout boxes. My favorite blanket was folded neatly on the couch, the same couch where I'd spent countless nights waiting for him, hoping he'd choose me over the party. Not anymore. I gathered the last of my things into a duffel bag, my laptop, a few toiletries, the blanket I'd been sleeping under. As I zipped it shut, my hands didn't tremble. They were steady, certain, like I'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. There was no note, no text, no grand announcement, just silence. I closed the door softly behind me and walked down the hall, each step echoing like a countdown ending. At Maya's place, she was waiting, leaning against the doorframe. "So, this is it?" she asked as I stepped inside with the duffel. "This is it," I said simply. We sat on her couch drinking tea. For the first time in months, I felt air filling my lungs fully. No weight pressing on my chest, no second guessing, just a vast, terrifying relief. The first nights alone weren't easy. The bed felt too wide. The silence felt heavier than I'd expected. My phone buzzed with Joseph's messages, short, careless ones. "Where are you?" "You coming home? We need milk." I ignored them all. Eventually the tone shifted, a clipped annoyed. "If you're mad, fine. But don't make this a big deal." I laughed bitterly when I read it, as if all the cracks, all the humiliations, all the betrayals were nothing more than me making things a big deal. Instead of replying, I turned off notifications. While Joseph partied, I rebuilt. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected. I signed up for a painting class I'd always put off because Joseph didn't like messy hobbies. I stayed late at work, not because I had to, but because I wanted to prove to myself I could thrive without his shadow over me. Meanwhile, Joseph made sure the world saw him thriving, or at least pretending to. His Instagram filled with photos of him and a new woman. Blonde, bold, half-drunk smiles captured in blurry selfies at rooftop bars. Captions like, "Finally living my best life," and "Some people just don't get me, but she does." Mutual friends sent me screenshots, pity, mixed with judgment in their texts. "Are you okay? Have you seen this?" I told them the truth, I'm fine, and I was. Because while he was broadcasting his supposed upgrade, I was quietly upgrading myself. I didn't need to announce it. I didn't need to prove it. My healing was private, steady, and real. But deep down, I knew something his selfies couldn't hide joy, like that doesn't last when it's built on shallow ground. Joseph thought he'd left me behind, replaced me with someone more exciting. What he didn't realize was that I had already left him long before he posted that first picture. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. At first, Joseph's post painted the picture of a man who had traded up. Rooftop selfies, weekend trips, his arm slung around her waist like she was a trophy he wanted the world to see. People whispered that he looked happier than ever. But whispers have a way of turning. 2 months and a friend of mine mentioned over coffee. "You know his new girl. She's already complaining. He flakes on her constantly. Shows up late, cancels plans last minute." I sipped my drink, keeping my face neutral. Inside, though, a flicker of something shifted. Not satisfaction, not gloating, just clarity. Joseph wasn't someone who had outgrown me. He was someone who would keep repeating the same cycle no matter who he was with. And sure enough, the stories spread. He was seen at bars with other women. He ignored her texts. He'd vanish for days, only to pop back up with excuses. The same charm that once made me forgive him now left her furious. I didn't need to intervene. Karma was doing all the work. Meanwhile, my own life had quietly bloomed. At work, my boss noticed my late nights and offered me a chance to lead a new project, something I'd always dreamed of, but never pushed for while I was busy managing Joseph's chaos. I took it. I picked up running again, pounding the pavement each morning, feeling my body grow stronger, lighter. I started sleeping through the night without waiting for the sound of keys in the lock. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for someone else's storm. The shift was obvious enough that friends began commenting. "You look different, Robin. Lighter." I just smiled, because it was true. I wasn't carrying him anymore. Then came the barbecue. It was a mutual friend's summer gathering, burgers on the grill, kids splashing in a pool, laughter humming through the backyard. I almost didn't go, worried he'd be there, but something inside me whispered, "You're not the one who should be hiding." And there he was. Joseph stood, a smith the yard, alone, drink in hand. The woman from his Instagram nowhere in sight. His smile strained his eyes, darting as he noticed me. I felt the old nerves flare for a moment, the urge to shrink, to slip away before he saw me. But then Maya nudged my shoulder. "You okay?" I nodded, exhaling. Better than okay. So I stayed. I laughed with friends, helped flip burgers, played tag with someone's kids until we were all out of breath, and every so often I caught him staring. The man who once called me invisible was watching me like he'd never seen me before. But I didn't look back. That night, as I drove home with the windows down and the smell of smoke still in my hair, I realized something simple. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. His downfall wasn't my victory to claim. Because Joseph wasn't my problem anymore. He was his own karma. The first sign of his collapse came through a coworker. She leaned to smith my desk one morning, a conspiratorial grin tugging at her lips. "Did you hear about Joseph?" she asked. I froze for half a second, then forced my voice even. "No. What about him?" Her eyes sparkled. "That girl he's been parading around, gone. Apparently he ghosted her for someone else, and then she found out he'd been cheating the whole time. Drama." I nodded politely, though inside I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. Just confirmation of what I'd known all along: he didn't want partners. He wanted props. Soon after, his Instagram went silent. No more rooftop selfies, no declarations of living my best life. The loud joy faded into an eerie digital quiet. And that's when the messages started. The first was casual, "Hey stranger, how have you been?" I stared at the screen, then locked my phone. "2 days later, I missed talking to you. Can we grab coffee sometime?" Silence from me. Then the calls. 3 in 1 week. I ignored the first 2. On the third, I answered, curiosity prickling at the edges of my calm. "Robin," he breathed, as though saying my name alone should soften me. "Look, I know I said some things I shouldn't have. I was scared. I felt trapped, like I was settling down too soon. I panicked. But I see now, you were the only one who really cared. Can we talk?" For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. The man who told me I was the woman men only settle for was now trying to convince me I was the one worth chasing. "There's nothing to talk about," I said evenly. "Come on," he pressed, his voice dipping into that practiced charm. "Don't be like that. Everyone makes mistakes. You always believed in me. You were the only one who actually saw me." Saw him. The words cut deeper than he realized. I had seen him. That was the problem. "You made yourself clear, Joseph," I replied, my voice flat. Silence buzzed through the line. Then, sharp and defensive, he snapped. "So that's it. You're just going to throw away 2 years, like they meant nothing." "I'm not the one who threw them away," I said simply, then ended the call. From there, the desperation grew. He sent flowers to my office, cheap roses with a note that read, "Miss you." I handed them to the receptionist without opening the card. He cornered a mutual friend to act as his messenger. "Joseph says he regrets everything. He wants a second chance." I shook my head, not interested. The friend frowned. "Robin, he's really hurting. Couldn't you at least hear him out?" "Yes," I said calmly, "but I won't." And the strangest part, I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was detached, like watching someone act out a play I'd already seen. His regret didn't move me because it wasn't about love, it was about losing control. The man who once called me predictable was now the one spiraling unpredictable in his grasping. And for the first time, I felt a clarity so sharp it was almost freeing. I hadn't lost him. He had lost me. It was a Friday night when the knock came. 3 slow raps against the wood, heavy enough to rattle the frame. I already knew who it was before I even looked. When I opened the door, there stood Joseph. He was nothing like the man who had once strutted through crowded bars, smug with a drink in hand and a woman on his arm. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, and his eyes bloodshot, desperate, told me he hadn't slept in days. "Robin," he said softly, almost reverently, like my name was a key to unlock the past. "Please, just let me in so we can talk." I didn't move from the doorway. "There's nothing to talk about." His lip trembled. "Don't do this. Don't act like I didn't mean anything to you. We were together for 2 years. You can't just erase me like that." I kept my voice steady. "You erased yourself when you decided I wasn't enough." His face twisted, frustration bleeding through his practiced vulnerability. "I didn't mean it like that. I was drunk. I was stupid." "You meant every word." I cut him off. "That's why it came out so easily." He stepped closer, hands clasped like he was praying. I didn't know what I had until I lost it. "Please, Robin. I'll prove I've changed. I'll do anything." For a flicker of a second, I saw the boyish charm that once drew me in, the charisma that had made me believe he was worth the sacrifices. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "Yes." "This isn't about whether you've changed," I said calmly. "It's about respect. And once you told me I was just the woman men settle for, there was no coming back from that. You don't get to rewrite the story just because your gamble didn't pay off." His desperation curdled into anger. His voice rose. "So that's it. You think you're too good for me now. You think some other guy's going to treat you better. No one will care about you the way I did." I almost laughed. "You didn't care about me, Joseph. You cared about what I could give you. Big difference." He stared at me, breathing hard tears mixing with rage. For a moment, I thought he might lash out. Instead, he let out a bitter, broken laugh. "You're going to regret this," he spat, his voice cracking. "You're going to wake up one day and realize you pushed away the best thing you ever had." I met his eyes without flinching. "No, Joseph. I woke up the day you told me exactly what you thought of me. That was the day I realized losing you was the best thing that could have happened. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. His face crumpled, muttered something I didn't catch, then he turned and stormed down the hall. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a moment. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't heavy. Instead, I felt free. For the first time since that night at the party, I felt no anger, no heartbreak, just peace. Joseph had once tried to define me as the woman men settle for. But the truth was, he had settled for shallow thrills, temporary validation, fleeting excitement. And in the end, it left him with nothing. Me. I had my dignity, my clarity, my future wide open. And that was worth more than anything he could ever offer.